in the technology space. Namaste, I'm Rajesh Patel. I've been in the US for 20 years now. I work in the technology space and I advise startup on technology investment. Currently, I am advising healthcare technology startup as well. I'm going to introduce Purnima ji. Purnima ji, namaste. And I have seen your work, in the in the political space, as well as bringing Indian communities together. We just recently together started this initiative. It started by you. I just joined, and we are trying to create a framework around 5 areas, bringing Indo-American community together: media, education, academia, narrative building, ecosystem, fundraising, and there's good traction going on right now. So would you like to introduce yourself and go with this?
Thank you so much. Namaskar, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate Rajesh ji for having me for this session. It's awkward to introduce myself, but in short, I like to write. And some of the areas that I like to focus is religion, politics, as well as philosophy. So entirely, I'm interested in connecting to our own roots in a foreign land. And I believe the connection or to the root became even more deeper when I pulled myself to understand the connection of religion and politics. We'll talk about it further down, I suppose. So in general, I'm involved in all these areas, and I like to write and been working in the Indian American space, and it's mind-boggling what's happening to the Hindu community. And I feel the pain, because not just because I was born in the wonderful civilization alive, but it hurts because it feels like the entire world is trying to rip us apart. And I needed to understand that. And that is why I'm here. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Purnima ji. I'm going to introduce Jai ji. Jai ji, you have been in this space for very long, in the political space. You've been in the Washington, D.C. You are doing a lot of groundwork on behalf of Indo-Americans. You've been championing the civil rights of Hindus in America and abroad as well. And you've been appearing before the Congress Foreign Affairs Committee on Islamic extremism in the Bangladesh, as well as your front-line activities for activists for hate crimes impacting Hindu Americans. But go ahead and please introduce yourself.
Thank you. And Purnima, it's a pleasure to meet you virtually. I also follow your work quite closely and was quite impressed with the efforts of the Chicago Hindu American community in stopping the xenophobic resolution a few months ago. As a former director of government relations for the Hindu American Foundation, I was at one time the sole face of Hindu Americans that was regularly on Washington, on Capitol Hill, and in other federal agencies. That doesn't mean I was the only person doing work, but I was in a very unique position to be able to observe the dynamics of the American political process at a first person angle, and I could see the climax of the entities that are against us today. I saw the groundwork that they had been laying for many years. And it does not surprise me that we are at this apex right now. And while the battle is hardly lost, there is a long fight ahead. And I just hope that I can elucidate some of these things for our audience today.
Thank you, Jaiji. I have two questions. First of all, we had the Howdy Modi event 2 years ago in city of Houston, where I am from, and Indo-American community came together. We did wonderful events, and after that, the U.S. election happened, and I personally saw all the friends, kind of on opposite side of the spectrum all of a sudden. Trump versus President Biden, and it has divided the community so much. So somebody like me, in the absence of any sort of Indo-American voting framework, I would go by default because I live in Texas. I'm going to go and vote, as I've been voting for the past 5 years. So that's one angle, and also, yeah, we'll talk about that. But Pramilaji, go ahead on this. What do you want to say?
I think if I want to rephrase your question, you wanted to understand the election, November election 2020, Trump versus Biden, how it worked out.
Not just that, but future elections. How do Indo-Americans should come together, issues affecting us, and come as a voting bloc together and vote.
Thank you for clarifying the question. So let me start this with a anecdote right here. Since we're talking about politics, I think this is in this particular forum, I have one goal. And because of that, I would actually bring 2 points right here. First point is our I wouldn't even say Indo, it's Indian American Hindu community specifically. We are struggling between religion and politics. If you are following politics or religion, you find yourself in thousands of WhatsApp groups, who's either following religion or politics. But what I see, it's not surprising to me, because we are not really somebody who's going to go and defend ourselves. We just do our own thing. So what happens in those groups is, unfortunately, we are not taught to see the connection between politics and religion. And if I have to take historical context for that, Sri Krishna, our Lord Sri Krishna, also worked with kings. Gautam Buddha, an enlightened person, also worked with kings. And Ashoka, when Buddhism spread in the north of India, he was a king. And in the past, in our society, kings were surrounded by gurus and acharyas. So they were not separated. The idea that religion must be separated from the politics, and interfaith groups try to keep it just non-political doesn't make sense to me at the same time. Another aspect that is hurting our community is also if we don't understand the connection between activism. Now look at the human rights activism that is happening in the world, and animal rights and women rights and climate change. If you put Hinduism in the center, the solution is Hinduism, but nobody knows how to frame that in a way that makes sense. But activism is not separated from the politics. Look at what's happening in United States about BLM. I wrote an article when BLM came across about a year ago, past year ago. It was probably picked up some organizer and several other magazines. BLM and Shaheen Bagh is absolutely same exact tactics. There is, if you talk about racism here today in 2020 in this country, does it truly exist? In 2008, America elected a black person, half black person, twice. How could you say we have racism in this country? Secondly, the top Hollywood folks, Oprah, for instance, is she not billionaire? So the idea that is being pushed over here in terms of critical race theory is mind-boggling. Today in 2020, if somebody tells me that 20 years ago when I came to this country, I was actually looked upon as a brown girl, that is untrue. But today in 2021, I'm being looked at as a woman. I'm being looked as a brown color person, separated from America itself. So we are digressed, we completely digressed from the issue. And that is the point. That is by design. And our community, Hindu community, don't understand that. When these Hindu people went and supported BLM, they had no idea what they are supporting. They didn't know it was Act Blue who was collecting the funds. They didn't know Patrice Cullors was actually grabbing and milking the activism, and she was preparing the bed for her richness. They didn't know she was going to buy $1 million house after that. But after that also, nothing came out of it. So that is one point I'd like to make sure through this forum, people do understand there's a connection between religion and politics. You can't simply just separate them. You tell me 56 countries, Islamic countries, which of these countries is independent, non-Islamic countries, or they don't separate the Islamism from the politics over there?
But they are theocracies, so they by default they have defined their state religion. That's Islam.
That is what. And why do we Hindu hum theka laga ke rakha hai kya? As a Hindu, it is our responsibility to not have a Hindu Rashtra, to not talk about Hindu causes, to not safeguard our civilization, but they have the rights. That is one way lopsided situation that we have to come to a conclusion this is happening. The second point I want to bring is, yesterday somebody in one of this forum came and told Taliban is not Islam. I'd like to ask this question. What do you mean by Taliban is not Islam? Taliban is not following Quran. Taliban is not following Sharia. Taliban is not following Hadith. So whole idea of these narrative generators, I call them Buddhijibis, who comes and says that terrorism has no religion, but they are the same community who's coming after Hindus and saying that today there's a quote, I'm going to paraphrase it. They said, if you are subscribing to Hindu ideology, you're actually subscribing to caste identity. So today in live, should I say, if you subscribe to Christian ideology, you're supremacist. If you are subscribed to Islam and Muslim identity, you are a jihadist. Can I just say that out in the front? The point is they're not targeting Hindus under the layer of words. They're targeting Hindus and Hindu civilization. They're panicking right now because as a Hindu, we have not invaded a single country. We're only 3% outside India and Nepal, just 3%. Out of the $1.25 billion, very fractionable people were in North America and elsewhere. So we're not influential in that sense at all. We're not running for political positions. We're not influential and trying to make them even come up with statements. So our issue is two. One is we're fighting and are not able to understand that there is a connection between religion and politics. Two, when somebody else come to us and attack us, we are unable to defend ourselves.
Thank you, Purnima ji. You touch upon some important issues. Jay ji, you've been in this space for very, very long, and I've had the same questions that what is the framework that we should follow as a Hindu Indian American for voting purpose? You heard Purnima ji's story. Now, please, your opinion.
Thank you. And I 100% agree with Purnima ji that the BLM movement was extremely dubious in its outset, and its actual. And I was going to actually bring up the issue of Shaheen Bagh because Shaheen Bagh was actually a precursor to the riots that we had in the United States of America, where cities across the country were burning as a result of false misinterpretations of police action against certain said criminals, or and while the case of George Floyd is being litigated or was being litigated at the time, the sheer audacity of Democratic lawmakers to simply allow cities to be burned, businesses to be looted under the guise of equity and religious, or excuse me, of racial justice is exactly the same tactic that has been used in the subcontinent for over a century with respect to religious communalism. And that, I fear, is going to become far more normalized in political space here in America as well as India. And what I would like to bring out to our audience today is that and from what I was told previously about the subject matter of this session was the nexus or the axis between the red and the green, the communist or Marxist ideologies and Islamist ideologies. This is going to become far more entrenched in the political dialogue of both countries. And I don't have a way to influence Indian politics. I mean, I can share as much as I want to on social media, tweets from leaders in India whom I agree with, but my agency is here in the United States. And what I see the pathway for us to becoming more vigilant and more proactive is actually joining politics in the most basic forms in American society. Becoming precinct captains at your local precincts where voting is taking place, joining the process of ratifying school curriculum policy, whether you actually become a member of the school board or you become an active participant in school board meetings. See, right now, so let's take Black Lives Matter, for example, a critical race theory. That is being argued actually very effectively by the right currently, and there are considerable, they're gaining considerable success in advancing awareness that critical race theory is actually detrimental to the education of American students across the board. And that detriment is going to impact people of all races and socioeconomic backgrounds. And what I saw yesterday and what I have been seeing with regards to this dismantling Hindutva ideology is actually the parallel ideology to that, critical caste theory, that by virtue of being Hindu in identity, you are therefore Brahmanical, and you therefore subjugate those of the lower strata of society, the Dalits, so to speak. And that assertion or allegation against us is that while this is happening at the university level, where I fear it's going to become far more institutionalized and far more weaponized against us is at school boards and within school districts of the American education system, and we actually have the opportunity and we actually have the agency to be able to challenge that and change that, because A, we're taxpayers in this country, and B, you actually have the ability to go and protest that. Whereas at the university level, while I'm not saying that it's not a fruitful endeavor, it's not as direct of a pathway for us to be able to change that. We can complain, we can highlight, we can protest all we want there, but at the end of the day, universities are kind of an insulated institution, whereas school boards are directly accountable to parents. And I'm not a parent yet, but whenever that day comes, but I still pay taxes to my school board, I can be more proactive in that venue. And we've seen the value of that. Let's say the Santa Clara County Commission that was going to be enacted. And I feel that is the pathway for us to actually advancing a collective Hindu identity and agenda, because otherwise the other venues that we may have to our disposal right now are a bit too ethereal. If you want direct change, it's at that level, the most granular level of American society.
Thank you, Jayji. I have heard the figures 4 million to 6 million voting bloc as a Hindu Americans, citizens over here, and we do have our children growing up. They are becoming a voting age, so it's actually expanding. Plus, we are considered as one of the most kind of a wealthy community in US, so we do have some sort of influence. Uh, but my question is about Pramila Jaipal and Ro Khanna. These two persons, they've been going against anti-CA of India. So coming all of us together, how can we how can we have these politicians represent our point of view about supporting Indian government on some of these bills, as well as supporting our issues?
Can I take a first stab at that?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. So of course, I was very enthusiastic about CAA when it had passed. And of course, the marketing and the PR mechanisms of the Indian government could have been far more effective in broadcasting the value of this law. But in terms of actual jurisprudence, it's perfectly fine. And I think with the current context of Afghanistan falling, see, yesterday, I'll just give this I'll give this caveat and then I'll bring it back. Yesterday, Kamala Harris spoke at Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and frankly, she's by virtue, she's practically irrelevant now in the political landscape. So nobody was even covering her speech, but I happened to find a random tweet about it where she mentioned how Sikhs and Muslim Americans were being discriminated against in the aftermath of 9/11 because of the way they look and the way they worship. And it really struck me at how tone deaf that was. Now, while empirically there is most certainly evidence that Sikh Americans, especially, as well as Muslim Americans and even Hindu Americans, anybody who looked like they came from that region of the world, was definitely discriminated against. Those, by and large, were isolated incidences, and they were not targeted by critical masses of the American population, nor was it a pogrom of designed by the state. And it just struck me as so tone deaf when the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan virtually has no Sikhs in it remaining today. Definitely no Hindus, although I've read there's one straggling Hindu who refuses to abandon the mandir in which he's serving, and we should pray for his safety and security. But the presence of the most indigenous people of that region is gone by state design. And so currently, I do not think the Democratic Party, and by the way, Joe Biden in his campaign website chastised India on Kashmir, CAA, and the National Registry of Citizens, which has not even been enacted yet, as a I guess preliminary or as a proactive measure of something to complain to India about or complain about India at the behest of the Islamist lobby that has penetrated his campaign and now has proliferated throughout his administration. Currently, I actually don't think any Democratic lawmaker has any standing to criticize India on CAA now. And we have to make them realize that CAA was actually the most fortuitous piece of legislation that India has enacted in recent years, considering the precipitous deterioration of Afghanistan. And now is the time for us to be vigilant about expressing our discontent with any American lawmaker who thumbs their nose at India for political gain here in America, again, at the behest of the entrenched special interests who are actually ripping apart the American social fabric here as we know it.
Thank you, Jayji. I think this quote from Purnima ji, don't look for success at the expense of others' misery. I think that's perfectly valid what Jayji just said. Go ahead, please, Purnima ji.
I totally agree with what JG just mentioned. But I would also want to bring up here, remember when Kamala Harris, an entire Democratic Party, was standing against CAA, India, Kashmir issue, etc. At the same time, Indians here in the United States and deep-pocketed Indians were raising funds for Joe Biden. Ask me why. Are they blind, deaf? Are they not, don't they have the little bit of idea or wisdom? I wouldn't even go into wisdom. Wisdom is very, it only comes to certain people. So at least just an idea for connecting the dot, what's happening. Now, when JG was saying that they don't have the right to criticize India right now, I would simply say they didn't have the right to criticize India then too. Do you know why? Because their primary accusation was the CAA was excluding Muslim. Now, let me ask you this. India is surrounded by 3 Muslim countries, 3 Islamic State countries. One of them 100% erased Hindus and Sikhs. One of them is almost there. 1 or 2% is left, and another is about 8% Hindus left. You all know who I'm talking about: Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So who are they to dictate India? Who are they to dictate Hindus? And I'm tired as a Indian American that these guys have the audacity to dictate us and to tell us, to shame us, to intimidate us. And we cannot even say that you are oppressing us. The oppressors are pointing fingers at the oppressors. And that hurts as an entire community. Now, I think it is time for us to even bring out these little issues. The people who were involved in Chicago, raising $3 million, one night fundraisers for Joe Biden. What were they thinking?
So, and forgive me if I misrepresented what I said to even say they had the right at any point in time. They didn't have the right. I mean, they have the right to say whatever they want. It's in a free republic, but they do not have the advantage right now. And this is a tactical game. This is 5th generation warfare, where it's information versus information, and we have to use this time to our advantage. That as Afghanistan, falls within the hands, tragically falls within the hands of an Islamist government whom we were actually fighting for over 20 years. We were trying to uplift a society for 20 years, and it's completely fallen now. And we can discuss why that happened at a different point in time. But this is our opportunity to show why CAA was a critical piece of legislation. And if I may go further, since I have the floor now, we also have to understand the American political landscape to its best, to the best of our ability. And I think we also get we are also misled by the same media outlets, the same publications that will denigrate us. We will trust them on a variety of other topics, and that also includes domestic policies within the United States. And I feel that is also a very dangerous precedent that we have set for ourselves. And so, for example, I'll be totally honest with the audience. I actually appear on Steve Bannon's podcast quite frequently. He asks me to speak on a variety of topics related to the subcontinent. And lately, he's been asking me to speak on Pakistan. And one thing I've noticed is there is a whole section of American society who is lockstep and key with us in agreement on the detriment of Pakistan to America and to American interests, national security interests. And I think it's time for us to wake up and realize that there's an entire section of the American society that wants India to rise as a superpower, that believes Indians living in the United States are Americans and are contributing to American society very productively, and this is not necessarily a reflection of our political ideologies or our political parties that we may affiliate ourselves with. They just see us as productive members of society. And I feel it's time that we, instead of trying to convince our own who likely are not convincible, I feel we need to reach out to fellow Americans. And I would say, like, for example, I'm doing so on the right side of the spectrum. I have quite a bit of success in that. And I think that that is a far more effective use of collective energy of this subset of people who are dedicated and passionate about advancing the cause of awareness about Hindu Americans and Hindu American causes, and not in the, because we don't have a collective interest in trying to convert people. That's just not what we do. We're just trying to express to find allies. And so while the intersectionality on the other side, the South Asianists who are intersected with the Islamists or intersected with the neo-Marxists and those who are providing apologist attitudes towards Antifa and other destructive forces within American society, we should find allyship and build alliances with people who are trying to build America, trying to rebuild America from the ground up, trying to reinvigorate American industries and society. And I think that is where our future lies as a political social movement.
Thank you, JJ. I think in the interest of time, I would like to invite audience for the question answers. And first question, Purnima ji, you should take the question and respond to the audience questioning. Anybody in the audience, please go ahead. The questioning to guest here. Yeah, somebody please unmute Lakshman Prajapat, please.
Thank you again for wonderful sessions. All of you, pranam to you, Ram Ram. So one question to you guys, it may, because I did not enter all the conference in sequence, so forgive if this is discussed already. With Native Americans and Jews, can we make alliance with that? JG, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. And I think it's critical we do so with Native Americans, because I feel right now they have several grievances with the American government as a whole. However, they are I feel we also need to engage with them proactively, not just on a religious level, but on a social level, trying to uplift their community, providing services to their populations, because they have been economically disadvantaged or marginalized for several years, or for several generations, excuse me. The Jews, of course, they're especially in this last iteration of the fighting between Hamas and Israel. There was a lot of groundswell support from Indian Americans, Hindu Americans particularly, for Jewish Americans against anti-Semitism, as well as for the cause of Israel to defend itself. Another community that I believe we have not fully understood, but it's actually more critical that we engage with them proactively, is the Armenian American community. Just recently in May, President Biden had declared that the genocide perpetrated by Turkey before World War II against the Armenians was in fact a genocide, and he finally recognized that 106 years later on behalf of the American government. And many people don't know this, but Pakistan. So Armenia was a former Soviet socialist republic. It was created as a nation state after the fall of the Soviet Union. And Pakistan is the only country in the world that actually doesn't even recognize that Armenia exists on a map. Oh. And the reason for that is likely because Turkey used its leverage over Pakistan, even though Turkey was quote unquote a secular republic for most of its existence from 1923 onwards. They still had a very strong Islamist bent to their agendas, and they used Pakistan's geopolitical leverage to do that. Pakistan was actually caught sending mercenaries in this recent conflict between Azerbaijan, supported by Turkey. Pakistan sent jihadi mercenaries to defeat, at the request of Turkey, and likely to leverage some other support for other future battles in Kashmir. And right now, the cause of the Armenian people is something that we should be very much engaged with, because they are very much engaged with us. Like the American Armenian National Committee of America has been very active on social media and even within their advocacy work on Capitol Hill, trying to elucidate the partnerships or the evil alliance between Turkey and Pakistan, and especially how it's played out in Afghanistan. And so I think that's an alliance we really need to build locally. And so seek out Armenian American partners in your local communities. That's my advice.
Oh, thank you, Jayji. Armenian American. I mean, this is news to me actually. Living in 20 years and not knowing about this, I'm sure many learned this angle.
Just Raji, just one line. Looks like the Jews are following this Parshuramji and Chanakya Niti. That before the enemy thinks bad about you, get rid of it.
Purnima ji, would you like to take this as well?
Yeah, just one quick point. Sadhguru is actually working on a spiritual aspect of the Native Americans. So there's, as a Hindu, we are ancient civilization. Our methods, our tradition and culture doesn't align with the American and Western world. But at the same time, as a Hindu, whether you are in Australia, New Zealand, India, or America or London, you still somehow keep your tradition going. We assimilate in the workspace as well, without demanding to be, we want certain kind of caps or things like that, or certain kind of timeline out of our work time to go pray. We don't ask or we don't demand that kind of stuff. So what I was going to say is from Sadhguru's work in the Native American space is going to be quite interesting, and I'm watching that space. And I think that will open up a tremendous amount of area for us to connect and collaborate.
Thank you. Can somebody unmute Dinesh Nilavarji? Admins?
Yeah. Okay.
Dinesh, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank
Yes.
you. Thank you, Rajesh. So good to hear from the panelist. Very good talk by Purnima ji. So my take is on geopolitics. So Chanakya Niti can be worked on the geopolitics, which even Kissinger in his book has talked about the Chanakya Niti. Arthashastra. It is actually taught in the USA Army College also, okay? Defense Academy. So the bigger question here is, India is playing a geopolitics, and it is a very dangerous game plus long-term game, okay? So all this attack on India is basically, this is more of a civilization attack, which is being discussed long before, right? Clash of civilization. But the point here is, Osama bin Laden had made a statement. Somewhere I read recently that he said that, all the Islamic countries with China have to come together to go against United States and India. So they are seeing the United States and India together against their civilization. Okay, so they know that. Not everybody, but Al-Qaeda today, that second in command, made a statement including Kashmir in his statement, saying that they're still continuing, even though the rest of the local people have stopped all these things, right? They are all accepting the Indian state, but there is this global movement which wants to continue perpetuate the Islamic expansion, which is the civilizational expansion, but it is clashing against the other civilizations. So geopolitics is one way of doing it. So my question here is, Jay, do you discuss geopolitics? This is a very difficult topic. Indian geopolitics is different, coming from great game and lot of British involvement in that area for 300 years. So we are coming out of that, and it's a very big change is going to happen in the next 50 years. Do you discuss that with Bannon and his TV show? And I want to understand the perspective, whether you guys have looked at this part of a way of looking at and long-term solution for India.
Thank you, Dinesh. We do overshooting time, and the other guest is also waiting speaker. So please keep your answers short. And we have one question.
Number one, yes, absolutely. Steve Bannon is absolutely enchanted by the idea of a rising India, and he supports it, and he supports former President Trump's overtures to India, especially in the last 2 years of his administration. And I would encourage actually this audience to tune in to that show on a regular basis and learn about what the average American is thinking about a variety of topics and from an unfiltered position that's not, that's not tainted by special interests of the, broader corporatist America. So tune into warroom.org, WARROOM.org, and I believe he asked me to come on tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, so perhaps the audience can tune in then. But I think Indian Americans and Hindu Americans should really tune into that show to understand a segment of society that has likely been portrayed as demonic or as antithetical to our point of view, when actually we have a huge alliance partner waiting for us to become a force of good in the American political field.
Thank you. Purnima ji?
Yeah, in the wake of terrorist state of Taliban, things have changed drastically as well. And in JG, you have spoke earlier about right side of the aisle in United States. One thing that we all must understand, there are three major enemies who's going after Indian American here, as well as the Hindu community in India, which is the largest, 95% almost. The title of this talk, red, green, and white axis. This is communist, the Islamists, and Christianists. It's interesting for us to keep it in mind. In the left side of the aisle, all three are aligned. In the right side, when we talk about Indians, Hindus are being targeted on the Christian conversionist, they don't like it. I got targeted for bringing up this topic. They even send me death threat. So the question is, do the right understand what they're talking about sometimes? Do we not have anybody? We don't have any centralist over here, of course. As a Hindu, when you bring up Hindu issues, you will find yourself neither fitting on the left, neither fitting on the right. So as a Hindu American, we must have understand where do we fall, and we don't have any allies on the left. We have some allies on the right, of course, and President Trump was one of them. But at the end of the day, Christian conversion didn't stop, and Modi ji has stopped in major Amnesty International and several NGOs like that, who are in, and by the way, major 4 organizations: IAMC, Indian American Muslim Council, the Amnesty International USA, and FIACONA, which is Federation of Indian American Christians of North America, and Hindus for Human Rights. They are the major ones who are working with the State Department as well as the IRF, International Religious Freedom. And some people might know that they don't allow me to even speak a word. I've worked for 8 to 10 months after them. Give me 3 minutes to explain what is going on to India. In Hindus in India, even here, they will not allow me to talk about love jihad. They will not allow me to talk about our grievances. It is their show. They have taken over everything. So when we talk about geopolitics in American context today, entire systems from top to bottom, whether it's governmental corporation or media or any others, has been overtaken in past 20 years. The whole conference was done because of they are attacking us. And 9/11, it's fascinating how they have flipped the narrative from Islamic terrorism to Islamophobia. So we must, at this point of time, we don't even have time. We have to work aggressively. We have to work collaboratively. We have to work together to make sure that we are setting the narrative and we are at the driver's seat, not America, not the West, not the Christianists, not the Islamist, not the communist.
Yep, I agree with both of you. We are kind of passive. This conference itself is a reaction to the DGH, which was very disturbing when I look at the image of that hammer and, picking out the, human being. Last question, admin, please unmute Bose, please. Mr. Bose. Go ahead, Mr. Bose.
Hey, Namaskar. So my question is basically more on the geopolitical aspect of this. Primarily, primarily the aspect of this organization called as CARE, that is Council for American Islamic Relations. We know in 2019, exactly when they came up with this job posting of recruiting interns for anti-Hindutva, specifically naming this as the job title, right? And then requesting people with background of writing articles against the Hindu right wing and things like that, right? So they started with this, and being an American institution, they were allowed to do this. They are also very well known in the front of funding terrorism, and even in the UAE, they are blacklisted in 2014 as a terrorist funding organization. However, we see in America and American society actually leveraging this specific organization, which is on all fronts funding and supporting things like CAA legislations against CAA and things like that in America. Are we can we in any way or contribute towards fighting this specific organization and trying to tackle these terrorist funders?
Yes, I think we are doing that. I think Purnima ji, go ahead, please. I think we already started doing taking initiative in this.
Yes, we certainly, as I said before, we collaboratively have to work, and it doesn't matter where we are in terms of politics or not. We, as an activist, individual activist, have to raise our voice, and we know it's not going to be easy. We know we're going to be getting threats. We know they're going to come after us, but should that stop us from doing what's right for us? So yes, CARE and all these organizations are working with the State Department, unfortunately. So what can we do? Hindus, we are not in politics. Even if we are being bought at the same time. When you talk about Pramila Joypal or Ro Khanna, these guys are hand in gloves with the CARE and other organizations. So to me, individually, we have to be strong enough. We have to know where we come from, what our roots are, and not let them actually buy us. Even when if we are getting a top position, doesn't matter. And that happens on the other side. But our side, we somehow, our people sell themselves for position, for money, for media coverage or things like that. That needs to change. And my article just came out yesterday. One of the point I specifically wrote was, our fall is not going to be because of Islamist or communist or this or the Christianist. Our fall is going to be the enemies within us. If we cannot identify and shame them in public for what they have done, all these people who have done supported Joe Biden and also supporting the Islamic takeover in the State Department, as well as all these organizations who's working, USAID especially, we have to shame them publicly.
Okay.
No, not so. So I would say that we are working on that, and we can't just talk about all the foundation here and out in the public. But you will see a lot of work going to come out.
Thank you, JG, please.
Thank you, and I would like to bring something into perspective here. Look, going after CARE and organizations like that will have its minefields as well, and I think they do enough work to damage their own credibility. I'm not saying take the eye off the ball, but in perspective, where I feel right now our collective community interests are aligned with a broader American imperative, is if you really distill it down, a strong Hindu identity that is expressed at a national level, in India, is really only a threat to one country in the world, and that is Pakistan. And currently in the political context today, from my observation from both sides of the aisle and and independents and so on and so forth, I have never seen so much vitriol targeting Pakistan. Now, granted, this is all just verbiage, that's being expressed on Twitter, but I feel that there's a vacuum right now of leadership in this realm to finally articulate a cohesive, coherent position of how Pakistan has been a huge detriment to the American geopolitical to America's national security interests and our geopolitical outlook. And I feel instead of focusing on organizations like CARE, where they may have they're going to have overt sympathy just by virtue of being an organization that represents the interests of the Muslim American community. So that is going to be a minefield that likely is going to lead to other problems. While I'm aware that CARE is not a holistic organization and they have many nefarious agendas, of which I personally and professionally have been the target of, I do believe that collectively, if we focused our interests on, or focused our efforts on really elaborating on the detriment of Pakistan and all of its forms, whether it's targeting religious minorities, using American aid dollars to advance their military industrial complex to target India, as well as destabilize Afghanistan to the point now where the Taliban has completely taken over, as well as many people may not know this, but if you're watching, television interviews by Moeed Yusuf, who is the National Security Advisor of Pakistan, he was working at the United States Institute of Peace, which is their building is across the street from the State Department. His salary was paid for by American taxpayers, and he's now the National Security Advisor of Pakistan, in which he's basically the architect of the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. The general American public needs to learn more about this, and American lawmakers need to finally be awakened to these realities. And I feel this is where our best opportunity lies today, and into at least, granted, the red-green axis may be difficult to break in at whole, but at least we can highlight the green axis, the green part of that axis more effectively.
Very true, very true. Yes, last word.
If I could just add one quick thing, the gentleman worked about, or actually mentioned about 2019 CARE job description. 2021 NYT had published a journalist requirement in India. An American corporation located in India asked for, and job description said that the journalist has to be anti-Modi, anti-India. If that kind of sentiment is pushed within India, what is Indian government doing? I would like to ask this question to our elected leaders, Hindu leaders in India. What are they doing? Aren't they able to pass any kind of laws and legislations and policies to stop this kind of direct attack on the land of Hindus? So to answer your question, though, this was the only thing I would like to say, that this is not happening it's happening even now. And Twitter dismissing our vice president in India and totally, banning President Trump over here. Think about it. We are nobody. If they could do a elected person as well as a billionaire, who are we? We are not paid by any RSS components. We're just doing an individual activist. So I just wanted to say that this is a very, very critical issue, and there is a lot going on over here. We just don't have the right resources immediately because we are all individually working, and that's why the building ecosystem is quite integral part of how we are going to be addressing these issues.
Thank you, Purnima ji. Thank you, JJ. We are at the inflection point as a Hindu American. I think we will coming together as a force. Thank you so much. I'm honored.
Lovely meeting you, Jay.
Thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.